less. They're less likely to fight back until things get uncomfortable. What happens in between comfort and discomfort? Well, you have the government. When people don't pay attention to what the government is doing, it will get out of control, and it will grow far beyond the reach of where it was intended to be. And we see that. We're not where we were intended to be, where we were at our founding. I mean, case in point, you have the ruling on the cake, and the baker doesn't have to bake the cake. I mean, is it not obvious that our founding fathers would have agreed with the concept of religious freedom, so you're not forced to participate in religious ceremonies you disagree with? So what about the evidence of this? Well, take about the evidence of people who are comfortable, okay? Donald Trump. Trump is the wake-up call we as a country have been waiting for, the silent majority, if you will. So where have all these people been since Reagan? Well, I mean, Reagan was a conservative president, right? A lot of people said best president in the 20th century, in modern times. Well, the silent majority, we got comfortable. People got comfortable after Reagan. They got okay with how things were until the discomfort of the size and scope of government and the corrupt politicians became so overbearing for them to handle that they had to make a change, because it was obvious that the prospect to the people of this country, the prospect of a Hillary Clinton presidency, was widely believed it was going to make people's lives worse. How does this affect us here? How does this affect us here in the state of Arkansas? Well, we're way too comfortable as a state with the current affairs, the current status quo here in Arkansas. We're way too comfortable with. During the primaries this year, voter turnout was unnervingly low. Outside groups like Conduit News or Patriots of X746, outside of groups like that, you don't really see a whole lot of pushback against the way things are going, the way the government's going here in Arkansas. So how did it become like this? Well, the fault rests squarely on the shoulders of the people. If that sounds harsh, it's because it's supposed to. Arkansas and the Arkansas and the country as a whole are in a state they are in because we allowed this to happen. And the people aren't alone to blame. I mean, inevitably, it is the politicians that have taken advantage of the lack of public engagement to advance their corrupt policies, and we, the people, are suffering because of it. We elected the politicians in the first place, though. But back up to nationally, in Washington, D.C., we allowed the same people to stay in office for 40 years. These people have crafted policy for 40 years, and they've got a poor track record of keeping the people in mind as they craft that policy. They think the status and they think the elite special interests, they think about those people above all else, and they continue to build themselves up while suffocating the people. Does this happen in Arkansas? Absolutely. Do people pay attention? No, they don't. Happens in Arkansas, but maybe in slightly different ways. We've got term limits here. I mean, they're much larger since the convicted John Woods got his way. But when state legislators get subjected to the term limits, or when the governor deems them worthy, they get a nice state job, a reward for playing ball, for keeping the status quo going. Who will be the next to get a government job as a reward? Well, that's a good question. We should start a pool. In some cases, the politicians decide to create their own schemes, though, and get their colleagues to play along. Jake Files, John Woods, Mike and Neal, Rusty Cranford, Randall Shelton, Orrin Paris, and more built themselves up a nice little fraud scheme, and thankfully they got caught before they could steal any more of our money, the taxpayers' money. The bottom line is this: we as the people must wake up and pay attention, or else we will not recognize this country or this state that we love so much in 20 years. While we wait to see who else will be indicted or who else is going to plead guilty on corruption right here in Arkansas, let's commit ourselves to telling our family and our friends to wake up and pay attention. For Conduit News, I'm Paul Harrell. Hey, do you
I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers.
They seem to be in full-scale retreat from spending cuts and are talking about raising people's taxes again. And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. Those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is on now.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for being with us. You have found the intersection of conservative ideas and reality. We're building a liberty machine here. We are 2 days before the celebration of Independence Day, the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and it is a lot of fun. And there's a lot of, I went to a barbecue last night. Let's see here. The phone number is 870-275-9799. That's 870-275-9799. If you would like to be a part of the program. We do have a great show for you. We have a ton of information that broke when we got off the air on Friday morning about the, what would you call it? I guess the Medicaid mafia. And we say this because it actually is true. You have this huge scandal between Medicaid providers and senators getting paid, allegedly bribed, according to federal documents in the Western District Court of Missouri, or the judicial district there. And it goes really, I think, much deeper. I don't even know if we will ever understand fully. No, I don't know if it'll ever be fully disclosed how deep the public corruption is in Arkansas right now. I hope it's all exposed, and I hope people are brought to justice if they have, in fact, done something wrong. Of course, one person who's in the news repeatedly over the last month is the governor, his nephew, the governor's nephew, Senator Jeremy Hutchinson, accused of taking $500,000 in bribes from Preferred Family Health Care, disguised or laundered, if you will, as attorney's fees. You see, these people are, we saw this with the public corruption of John Woods. We saw this with the public corruption of Micah Neal and others. It does appear that a lot of these individuals understand that if they want to enrich themselves with taxpayer dollars, they have to find a way to wash the money to do so. They have to find some sort of conduit, if you will, to transfer the money to them and make it appear legitimate. Again, the phone number 870-275-9799. So I'm going to get to that because we have a former DHS employee who then goes to work for Preferred Family Health Care. He knows the system, and he takes advantage of it. That's what we want to talk about, him and everything else. And Preferred Family Health Care's, their contracts have now been canceled, thankfully. I'll talk about that. Of course, they're protesting. They think because they're now cooperating that we should just ignore the fact that they've stolen from us and bribed our politicians. The politicians are the ones encouraging this as well. And we, the people, really, I feel like everything that we're finding out that's just so incredible when it comes to the corruption, the media, the mainstream media, bears a little bit of this responsibility, or a lot of it. I mean, it just depends on your opinion here. It's subjective, but they're supposed to be speaking truth to power. And if they ask the kind of questions that lead to some of this discovery, something tells me that maybe their cozy relationship with some of these politicians might not exist in its current form. When you talk about some of these media outlets, their studios are right there next to the Marble Palace, and it just really blurs the lines. You really don't know where the government ends and the propaganda outlets begin. That's kind of the way I feel about it. Okay, but I want to start this top of the program with just a little bit of a national story. We realize that over the last couple of weeks, we had the Inspector General report, and in that Inspector General report on the Hillary Clinton investigation, how the FBI handled how she wiped her servers with a cloth. Remember, she used bleach bit and everything else. The handling of it, and we found out that high up in the FBI, there was an effort to essentially presume her innocent before they even did an investigation. We have evidence of massive amounts of corruption. Matter of fact, the left is left just kind of stewing in their own vitriol that they've created here. If you look at what happened with James Comey and James Comey's firing, it's obvious if you read the Inspector General report that it was warranted. And instead of talking about the Inspector General report for the last 2 weeks, the media looks down to the southern border and creates a story based on events that are reoccurring events, with illegal aliens attempting to cross the border with children in hand. And in some instances, there are reports that you have families from Mexico that actually give their children up to smugglers that show up to the border and claim, this is my child, when in fact this is not their child or their children. And I would imagine that the policy is being enforced a lot, with greater frequency, if you will, than previous administrations. But still, this concept of separating children, that was the story. That was the narrative. Can you believe Donald Trump? He's heartless and everything else. I saw Tim Robbins, the actor that nobody cares about, say that President Donald Trump, that we've put a child abuser in the White House, referring to what's happening at the border. Interesting. Even though this has been going on since the 90s, this is what happens. I was talking about this with a family member the other day, over the weekend, in some pre-Independence Day festivities. And this person says, it's really the bottom line, because we were explaining it to nieces and nephews. And the bottom line is this. If you've got your child in the car and you do something illegal that requires you to go to jail, the child doesn't go to jail with you. That would be, and the kid spoke up at the dinner table and said, yeah, that would be wrong. The kids don't need to go to jail if the mom does something wrong or the dad does something wrong. And that's the separation that we're talking about here. They're breaking the law. The Democrats, in trying to ignore the Inspector General report, by focusing on this, and the media trying to focus on that, what have they done? Have they fallen into their own nets that they tried to lay for the president? They have fallen into their own nets once again. Because now, in trying to distract, the Democrat Party has gone so far to the left, they are openly advocating for a complete lack of sovereignty. They don't want borders. Because when Donald Trump signed the executive order, what did they say? Well, we don't need any enforcement. We don't need you to stop these people from coming in. We don't think that they should be turned away or deported, that they should just be able to come on into this country. Well, most Americans, I would say a vast majority, way more than the mainstream media would ever want you to know, most Americans think that that is crazy. Crazy. I was thinking about it the other day, and I thought about it like this. I said, for thousands of years, nations and civilizations have fought wars over the concept of a border. Do you understand how crazy it is? It goes against, again, just human civilization. People fight wars over where the border lines are. And the Democrat Party and the leftists and the Marxists, because it fits their end, are now asking, and there are all these people, and it's nuts to me how just disconnected we are from this what used to be just a universally accepted thing that nations have borders in order to be a nation. And yeah, you're right, Joe. Their system works better with more people, but it's amazing how many leftist Hollywood types or people who are young and are not stupid people, mind you, and they haven't ever even had this thought that what you're asking is for us to completely undo what is really just a convention, an accepted universal convention that nations have borders and the people within those nations and the leaders get to decide how they want to allow people in. Do they want to allow people in? Do they want to have... I was watching this Sherlock Holmes movie, the second one, with Robert Downey Jr., and there's a portion in there where, because there's a potential war outbreak between France and Germany, they shut down borders, and it's very difficult to cross and to get through things, and I'm thinking, wow, those racists, those bigots, how dare they treat the Germans that way? How dare they treat the French that way in the movie, of course. And that's when it dawned on me what the left is actually asking people to forget here is just a system that has governed world affairs and geopolitics for a very long time. And you're seeing people in Europe wake up to this fact as well, and they're like, wait a second, we need to really control who gets to come in and out of our country. So I just wasted a bunch of time telling you all of this. Here's the real story. There's a stunning revelation that's buried deep in the IG report. This was from theblaze.com, and it really completely exposes, and this is just one aspect of what's in this report. I don't know if you guys have actually read it. Not the summary, not what the media told you about it when they covered it for 10 minutes. So this whole time, Loretta Lynch and Bill Clinton, when they met in the plane, when they met on the tarmac, it was a coincidence. Bill Clinton didn't even know that Loretta Lynch was there, and lo and behold, they're on the tarmac, and both their planes are parked right next to each other. The former president of the United States and the current attorney general, who's in charge of investigating his wife, who's trying to be the next president of the United States, which would have been an albatross around Arkansas's neck, by the way, because our system of government that we refuse to reform started this whole Clinton process, put them on the path to being arguably the most powerful political family in the world. And apparently now, according to the Inspector General report, Inspector General Horowitz says that that's not the case, that the Secret Service details had coordinated the meeting, that it wasn't a coincidence. This was a planned meeting on the tarmac, and it goes completely against everything that they have been saying. That this was a planned meeting, and the Secret Service detail of Bill Clinton and the Secret Service detail of Loretta Lynch coordinated the meeting. They knew exactly what they were doing. On page 203, the report states the OPA supervisor said that he later learned that former President Clinton's Secret Service detail had contacted Lynch's FBI security detail and let them know that the former president wanted to meet with Lynch. Although Lynch's staff was supposed to receive notice of such request, witnesses told us that they were not informed of the request from former President Clinton. So it was a request from President Clinton. It wasn't just, it's just a coincidence. Her plane was right there, and I didn't even know. I thought I needed to go and say hi. And say, hi, Loretta. How's it going? And we just talked about grandkids, and we talked about the family and things like that. In addition, Lynch revealed to the Department of Justice investigators she was not social with the Clintons and had never met with either one of them prior to the tarmac meetings. Both Clinton and Lynch denied discussing nefarious subjects. Anyway, this is a huge deal. It exposes, Bill Clinton is a liar, no surprise there. But here we go. I mean, it wasn't a coincidence, according to the Inspector General. According to this report, the Secret Service coordinated the events. And it says it right there. Stunning revelation. The controversial June 2016 tarmac meeting between then Attorney General Loretta Lynch and former President Bill Clinton was coordinated. If true, it blows a hole in the narrative Lynch and Clinton have maintained for 2 years. Anyway, we're going to take a break. We got a lot to get to today, folks. We're 2 days before Independence Day. Man, look at what has happened in the first 6 months of this year. It has been astounding on the federal level what has transpired, whether you were talking about Saudi Arabia recognizing Israel's right to exist, whether we're talking about the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and the potential that that has. I mean, it on a global scale. Now there was a leaked report that the president may be threatening to pull out of the World Trade Organization, which is huge. Huge. I would just say it's clear, huge. It's clear that that Donald Trump, if love him or hate him, not a status quo candidate. Not a status quo candidate at all. We got to take a break. Back in just a moment.
In a world full of constituents with social media accounts, bloggers just looking to increase their page views, and a talk radio host who generally is just the worst, how are Little Rock's elite supposed to conduct business with such a lack of privacy? Introducing the 1835 Club, older and more refined than other clubs that claim discretion. The 1835 Club is for seasoned political veterans that want to conduct the highest form of aristocratic business with the public's money. Are you a schemer? Do you someday want a guaranteed flow of taxpayer money to support your business? Is it your dream to see the .gov domain at the end of your business website? Don't listen to the imitators. The 1835 Club is the place where corrupt politicians and businessmen hatch their next crony schemes. At the 1835 Club, we make lobbying safe and legal. Ethics. Why, of course. All business is done in an ethical manner. Just look for the sign above the door that reads, loophole. Are you tired of the Capitol Police restricting your access to the roof after a perfectly good night of drinking? The 1835 Club has libations and a perfectly good roof. Other crony clubs that promise discretion try to lure you in by advertising bars made out of aeroplanes. Well, at the 1835 Club, instead of an airplane fuselage, we've got a space shuttle. No, not a bar. We've got an actual space shuttle that makes a daily run to the moon so members of the 1835 Club can have some real privacy away from the bloggers and taxpayers. Are you an Arkansas aristocrat? Do you want to be? It's the 1835 Club, and we work tirelessly to make sure the good old boy system remains alive and well. Join today.
Disclaimer. The 1835 Club reserves the right to deny membership to anyone who has principles. Any talk of the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution must be done in jest or, at the very least, with a condescending tone. And finally, the 1835 Club will be given a 25% commission of any agreements made between politicians and the business community.
PHP Parody.
The Declaration will be a triumph. I tell you, a triumph. If I was ever sure of anything, I'm sure of that. A triumph. And if it isn't, we've still got 4 days left to think of something else.
I mean, this is a 2-day. The next two broadcasts, as far as I'm concerned, are a 2-day pre-celebration of our independence, where we said to the most powerful army in the world at the time, yeah, I think we would rather trade our security for more liberty. And we decided to take up arms. And, I mean, it's not even what I just said doesn't even do it justice, but aren't you thankful? Aren't you thankful? How many of our politicians today would have signed a document in similar circumstances versus how many of our politicians today would be red coat sympathizers and King George loyalists? How many of them would be ratting on their fellow citizens for talking at their pubs about the fact that they have taxation without representation and they're thinking about doing something about it, or King George won't allow them to conduct the missionary missions that they wanted to do to try to spread the gospel to the Indian tribes and things like that. I'm just telling you right now, I think a lot of our politicians today, put in similar circumstances, would be loyalists and would be bending the knee to King George. I'm just telling you, that's my opinion of it all. I don't think we have men like that anymore in positions of power. I think we have people who love the power so much that they wouldn't dare do anything that might risk their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. That's what I think. Liberty is a very difficult thing to maintain. It's even harder to establish it in the first place. And that document, the Declaration of Independence, that states some deep theological truths about God and the fact that He is the arbiter of our affairs and that He is the one that grants unalienable rights, not the government. From our founding, the very concept of America was one of humility, because it recognized that the government that it's going to set up doesn't have all the answers, because there is a divine sovereign who does have all the answers. So, that is definitely something to think about on this upcoming Independence Day. Speaking of liberty, next week on July 11th, we will be interviewing Chris Ann Hall. Joe, throw this up there. This made it over on the Chris Ann Hall calendar. Chris Ann Hall is a talk radio host herself, and she is a very knowledgeable person when it comes to the Constitution and this concept of liberty that is so often not intuitive. The benefits of it not intuitive to us, and so you have to have people that understand it. You hear this, see this Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell interview on July the 11th from 8:30 to 9. Now, that is Eastern time, so that's why it says that. There was some confusion, people saying, well, your show's from 6 to 8, this has got the wrong time on it. That's just because I think that's more for Chris Ann than it is for maybe other people. But this so it'll be at 7:33 on July 11th. We'll be interviewing Chris Ann Hall, and certainly appreciate them, putting it out there and publicizing it. Just look at that website there, Liberty First by Chris Ann Hall, because liberty must be supported at all hazards. And look at some of this points to ponder, and just you should have fun navigating the website if you want to get acquainted with her and some of her, some of her videos and things like that. It's really good points, really good. Educator, from what I can tell, and educating the people and giving them the proper perspectives to share with their friends and their family. Again, her name is Chris Ann Hall, and we'll be interviewing her next week, July the 11th. We're up against a hard break. When we come back, I want to talk about a guy by the name of Ravindran. That's right. Who is Robin Ravindran? I'll tell you about it next.
It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
Joining us once again, we have Congressman Bruce Westerman calling in. Congressman, welcome back to the program, sir.
Good morning, Paul. Good to be with you this morning.
Yes, sir. It's
still rubbing that sore spot from the Hogs losing last night. But,
oh man.
Yeah, it was. I've told my kids all along that the closer you get to success, the worse the defeats hurt. So, we were right there on the precipice and missed that catch. But
you hate it for those. You hate it for those three ball players that were right there when the ball dropped. I mean, I really hate it for those three individuals.
Yeah, I mean, and they'll never forget that. But think of the life lessons that we all learned from it. I mean, think about how important communication is, and they'll be able to tell stories for a long time. But what a great year they had, and I mean, as bad as I hate to say it, Oregon State had a heck of a team, and that freshman pitcher was something else.
Don't the Razorbacks though have I guess a lot of freshmen are on their team as well, so they may have a lot that'll be back. I mean, assuming they're not drafted.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
We'll be cheering for them again next year.
Yeah,
I guess we've got football coming up now.
That's true. Well, it's always a pleasure to have you on, Congressman Bruce Westerman. And I want to talk about a few things. Let's talk about the budget first. As of right now, as of today, the House has passed 4 of the 12 appropriation bills necessary for funding our government before the end of the fiscal year. I mean, I know this is something that you've wanted the Congress to do for a long time, return to kind of a regular order in the budgeting process. But you also have to have the Senate that's going to play ball as well, right?
Yeah, and hats off to the Senate for taking up 3 of those appropriation bills. That's a feat within itself. So they're slowly making progress. I think the president telling them in March that he wasn't signing another omnibus may have gotten their attention. So we've got the military and VA appropriations bill done, the legislative affairs bill, and the energy and water, and also we just did the defense appropriations bill out of the House yesterday. So the neat thing about that is if the Senate can get all 4 of those done, we'll have appropriated well over half the money that will be appropriated, close to 3/4 of the money in the discretionary budget in those.
What egg?
America, the birth of a new nation.
If only we could be sure of what kind of a bird it's going to be.
Tom has a point. What sort of bird shall we choose as the symbol of our new America?
The eagle. The dove. The turkey. The eagle. The dove. The eagle.
The eagle. The turkey.
The eagle is a majestic bird.
The eagle is a scavenger, a thief, and a coward. A symbol of over 10 centuries of European mischief.
The turkey.
The turkey is a truly noble bird. Native American, source of sustenance of our original settlers. An incredibly brave fellow who will not flinch in attacking a regiment of Englishmen, single-handedly. Therefore, the national bird of America is going to be...
The eagle.
The eagle.
I know you're not supposed to do this as a talk radio host, but I had another point that I was trying to make in that last short segment before the hard break, and I completely blanked out. The telephone, it's going to come back to me, though. The telephone number, it had to do with the Declaration of Independence, 870-275-9799. That's 870-275-9799. Who is Robin Ravindran? Ravindran. That's right. No, I'm sorry. Ravindran. I'm mispronouncing it. Robin Ravindran. R-A-V-E-E-N-D-R-A-N. Ravindran. Sounds like a cold medicine. In this case, though, Ravindran would be a cold medicine that if you take, it knocks you out, and you wake up, and there's been a break-in, and you've been robbed. That's what this is. Robin Cold Medicine Ravindran. And person number 9. Who's person number 9 in the Rusty Cranford plea deal documents? Well, apparently, it's Robin Ravindran. Let's go. So here's the Arkansas Times headline. This is what this guy looks like. You see him there? That is Robin
Ravindran. Again, sounds like a cold medicine. But let's go to the, let's see, do we have the Democrat Gazette? What does that headline look like? Andy Davis, headline, June 29th. This was written after we got off the air on Friday, so we didn't get to cover it. Robin Ravindran, former non-profit executive, arrested in billing scam. I think you've got the wrong. Go ahead and find the Gazette article. Former non-profit executive arrested in billing scam that cost states' Medicaid program millions. This according to the Attorney General. So this guy works for Preferred Family Health Care, the same company that's using their Medicaid dollars, federal tax dollars, to bribe legislators, to get the legislators to send even more grants their way. A whole kickback scheme. This guy works for them. But before Ravindran worked for them, he was working for DHS. And as an administrator to the state Medicaid program, he would have integral knowledge of contracts, how the system works, how to do everything that Preferred Family would need him to do. And he was arrested. While working for Preferred Family Healthcare, Andy Davis writes, from March 2014 to December 2015, he caused employees under his supervision to submit more than 20,000 illegal claims for mental health services, Leslie Rutledge said. Rutledge noted that during most of his employment, Ravindran reported to Rusty Cranford, a lobbyist who pleaded guilty in federal court back on June 7th to federal program bribery. He admitted to bribing state legislators. One of them, he claims, is Senator Jeremy Hutchinson. Ravindran, again, no, we're not talking about a cold medicine. We're talking about a former government employee, was arrested Thursday evening on 2 counts of Medicaid fraud and booked into the Independence County Jail, where his bond was set at $250,000. Let's go back to that Arkansas Times article, shall we? Because I found their narrative extremely interesting here. David Ramsey, who is fast becoming known for writing the longest articles possible when it comes to Arkansas, in my mind. David Ramsey is writing some of the longest articles in the world when it comes to Arkansas corruption and the reporting of it. He writes that Person 9 was involved in Cranford's efforts to seek policies that benefited Preferred Family Health Care and other behavioral health providers. Person 9 was also affiliated with an advocacy organization for health providers that paid income directly from the dues providers were charged for membership to Person 9, Cranford, and then Senator Jeremy Hutchinson, according to federal information. Hang on, then Senator Jeremy Hutchinson. I mean, he's still a senator now, right? He hasn't resigned. Has Senator Hutchinson resigned and I have missed this? Why does that say then Senator Jeremy Hutchinson? I didn't think you had to resign unless you were, once you actually serve your first day in jail, according to that, then you need to resign, right? Isn't that how it goes? Then you need to resign. David Ramsey says the description of Person 9 appears to match Robin Ravindran. Robin non-drowsy Ravindran, the former PFH executive and former longtime staffer at the state's Department of Human Services, who was arrested Thursday in a separate case charged in Independence County with 2 felony counts of Medicaid fraud after an investigation by the state's Medicaid Fraud Control Unit. So it is, okay, so let's stop right here because this is interesting that this is a separate case. This is Medicaid fraud, not this, corruption angle here. It's Medicaid fraud, not the corruption angle. Now, I have a slight caution as the state is finally getting involved here. Okay, this has all been the feds for now. The feds in the Western District of Missouri. I mean, that's why we know all of this. The Arkansas, I mean, you do have John Woods being indicted and things like that, but I guess I have been wondering where the Arkansas districts, U.S. districts, are in all of this. Okay. Now that the state is involved, though, with this Medicaid fraud, I'm curious, is that going to delay federal action when it comes to FBI investigations into Arkansas politicians? These FBI agents are referring their findings to the U.S. attorneys in the eastern and western districts of Arkansas. When Leslie Rutledge now gets involved, and I don't know this for a fact, this is just a speculation of mine, and you need to understand it. Now that the state of Arkansas is getting involved here, pursuing these Medicaid fraud charges against non-drowsy Ravindran, will that delay federal action on this? Just a thought. The description of Person 9 appears to match Robin Ravindran, the former PFH executive. PFH has a vast network, according to David Ramsey of the Arkansas Times, 47 service providers in Arkansas that has brought in tens of millions of dollars in Medicaid funding, state grants, and contracts with the DHS. Stop! But we have an update on that. Millions of dollars in contracts, but no longer. That's right. If you go to this headline, on June 29th, Benjamin Hardy and Max Brantley reporting that the state suspends preferred family health care from Medicaid. DHS moves to terminate contracts. This is welcome news. Thank you that this private company that is obviously, no, we changed the leadership, Paul. We fired the executives. Everything's fine. We need this cash cow to keep. We need your tax dollars. There is absolutely no reason. This should have been done 2 months ago. There is no reason why Arkansas taxpayer dollars should continue to flow to this company. I don't care what they have done. This is clearly like racketeering. I mean, this is organized crime stuff. This goes so far. You have a private company who is engaged in taking federal dollars. It's not just Missouri. It's not just Arkansas. It goes all the way to New Jersey, and it goes all the way to Washington, D.C. This is a huge national scheme. And the fact that it took this long because, well, we're going to keep our contracts with this company because they've changed their executive leadership and they've rooted out all the corruption and everything else. Absolutely not. Sorry. You're telling me there's nobody else out there that can do these services? That's baloney. Of course there are. There's got to be some honest outfits out there. This was a dishonest outfit. Senator Brian King coined the phrase Medicaid Mafia from the floor of the Senate. That's exactly what this is. One of Preferred Family Healthcare's former employees who just pled guilty, Rusty Cranford, the lobbyist, tried to have the New Jersey lobbyist murdered, according to the government. And that's why they arrested him. By the way, one of the reasons, in my opinion, why Rusty Cranford originally denied everything but eventually took a plea is because they had him in custody. They didn't give him bond. He didn't, because they found him with, what was it, $17,000 in cash on him with a revolver right after he had spoken or attempted to hire the former felon for a murder for hire plot to go, get rid of the guy up in New Jersey. Something about a couple months confinement make you thinking, if there's a chance that I could actually have a life in 30 years, I'd like to, or maybe 20, or maybe I get out in 15. We'll see. And I think that's why he took a plea, by the way. So the state suspends preferred family health care for Medicaid. DHS moves to terminate the contracts. It's effective today. $33 million in Medicaid funds in 2016. We were paying preferred family health care $33 million 2 years ago. And I first of all, good, I guess good job, way to go, Arkansas government for. This is the equivalent of realizing that you have a kitchen fire and maybe you should go get some water, or call the fire department. Instead of just letting the dumpster fire continue, maybe you try to actually put the fire out. It's pretty. It's like you would think it'd be self-preservation. Or maybe keeping the contracts was self-preservation until it just got a little bit too hot. Do they have a quote here from ASA? Hang on a second. I'm in this one about the suspending of the contracts. It says the Attorney General's office has been aggressively investigating the involvement of Rusty Cranford, Robin Ravindran, non-drowsy, and others in the Arkansas Medicaid program since 2016. This investigation required the review of thousands of individual claims, resulting in the determination that there were 20,000 illegally billed mental health services for a total of $2.2 million from January 1st to October 19th of 2017. That's from 2015 to 2017. The FBI's investigation of these same individuals is regarding public corruption, whereas this investigation and arrest was based on Medicaid fraud. So we have the AG this is big. This is a very good positive sign here. Kind of goes against the argument I was making, the caution that I had a few minutes ago. But the Attorney General's office is saying this is Medicaid fraud. And again, we have another public official saying the FBI is investigating these same individuals' public corruption. Here is the release from the state announcing preferred family health care suspension to Medicaid. Today, the Office of Medicaid Inspector General notified the Department of Human Services it has determined there is a credible allegation of fraud against Preferred Family Health and its former employee, Robin Ravindran, again, cold medicine, based on an affidavit from Ravindran's arrest, has notified PFH and Ravindran. They are temporarily suspending both PFH and Ravindran's for payment for services for Medicaid money. Now, let's back up here for a second because I want to make one observation. Back up here for a second. Let's look at this statement from the government. The investigation started in January 2015. No, hang on. They've been investigating, since 2016. And they've been investigating what happened. They say that from 2015 to 2017, $2.2 million. How much of that $2.2 million was stolen while the investigation was going on? Most of it? You're probably right, Joe, because what happens is once you get away with it a little bit, then it gets out of control. Case in point, have you heard about the guy in Texas who was a food orderer for a prison in Texas? Have you heard about this? He stole, over a 9-year period, he stole $1.2 million worth of fajitas. Now, not the fajitas, like he was ordering the fajitas, okay, but never serving them to the inmates and turning around and selling the fajitas. And he said, he got convicted of this, and he said it was a small operation and then it just got out of control because he was probably selling this meat, and personally enriching himself way below market. And there was probably some, restaurant somewhere thinking, oh my gosh, this guy, I don't know where he's getting the meat. Well, it was the government of Texas that was paying for it. Do you know how much time he got? You know how much time this guy got for stealing fajitas over a 9-year period? $1.2 million. Texas, 50 years. That is insane. That is an insane amount of time. 50 years. I sent that to an attorney friend of mine, and he responded back in all caps, Texas, because they don't mess around. Now, that's just a low-level prison employee. Some of these politicians in Arkansas need to think, be very thankful that they don't live in Texas. 50 years for stealing $1.2 million by flipping fajitas. Think about that for a second, folks. When a credible allegation of Medicaid fraud exists, suspension of Medicaid payments is required by federal law. Medicaid Inspector General Elizabeth Smith, I'm carrying out my responsibilities as Medicaid Inspector General to protect the integrity of the Arkansas Medicaid program by issuing these suspensions. And so now, all of a sudden, we have the state falling in line here. Here's ACE's statement. Go to this other article. Preferred Family Healthcare has the audacity to appeal the state's suspension of Medicaid payments, saying we're complying with the investigation. We're complying with the investigation. Unbelievable that they have the spine to appeal the suspension of these contracts. I think if you're Preferred Family Healthcare, okay, if you're Preferred Family Healthcare, and you think your business is going to continue with the state of Arkansas, that's like Jake Files thinking he's still going to get to build the softball complex. That's like Jake Files thinking, Senator Files, who pled guilty, that he's still going to have a construction business with the same clout that he had. That he's, when he gets out of jail, I'm going to finish that softball complex. You're delusional, Preferred Family Healthcare. If you think this is going to keep going, you've been bribing our politicians, and our politicians have set this whole thing up in the first place. Listen to this. A spokesperson for Preferred Family Healthcare said wrongdoing at the nonprofit was limited to certain former employees, and Preferred Family Healthcare as a whole shouldn't be punished. The statement does not mention, however, the fact that those employees include several of the individuals who ran the provider for years. The statement noted that its dozens of locations throughout the state provide critical services, often in rural areas, and it stated that Preferred Family Healthcare has fully cooperated with the investigation. Previously, DHS and Governor Hutchinson's office have echoed those same arguments, that they're cooperating with the investigation and they provide vital services to rural areas. Not anymore, though. Not anymore. Governor Asa Hutchinson has changed his tune. Quote, I support the action of the Department of Human Services in suspending Preferred Family Healthcare in terms of Medicaid reimbursements. I indicated earlier today that the suspension is necessary. Thank goodness, again, at some point, if you have everybody running towards a fiery pit with a blindfold on, and the blindfold is removed, at some point, you think you stop running towards the fiery pit, right? 870-275-9799. We got to take a break. Back in just a moment.
Buy, sell, and trade at Triple R Pawn in Ash Flat. Firearms, computers, sporting goods, musical instruments, tools, jewelry, and everything else you can think of. It's all at Triple R Pawn at the Light in Ash Flat. Gun enthusiasts, log on now to TripleRPawn.com and browse their amazing inventory. That's TripleRPawn.com. You can also call them at 870-994-PAWN. That's 870-994-7296. Let the great team at Triple R Pawn help you find what you're looking for. That's Triple R Pawn at the Light in Ash Flat, TripleRPawn.com, or call 870-994-PAWN.
Russellville-based firearms manufacturer Omega are making clones of the most notable German firearms in the world. These delayed rotor-lock firearms have been and are currently used by law enforcement and military worldwide. At Omega, they manufacture their guns right here in Arkansas and produce the best reproduction in the marketplace that comes with a complete 5-year warranty. At Omega, they take firearm manufacturing seriously and offer discounts to active and retired law enforcement. Whether you're using Omega firearms to defend the public, defend your family, or for target practice, Omega has your back. For pricing, go to omega-guns.com. That's omega-guns.com. If you're like me, you believe that small business is the heart of Arkansas's economic engine, and it should be viewed that way by the politicians in Little Rock. Conduit for Commerce also believes, like you and I believe, policies that achieve less regulation and lower taxation help small business in Arkansas thrive. Other policies like small, constitutionally consistent government and reducing citizen dependency on government keeps it from growing and expanding its influence on our daily lives. Conduit for Commerce works every day to educate the general public and legislators on these important priorities in the name of Arkansas small business. By the way, contributions to Conduit for Commerce are tax deductible. Log on now to conduitforcommerce.org and click on Contact Us on the right side of the page. That's conduitforcommerce.org. Go there now and learn the facts on protecting small business in Arkansas.
Now then, attend, as friend to friend, our declaration committee. For us I see immortality in Philadelphia City.
So, as we look at the headlines, and here are more headlines, what I say every day, just on a daily basis, it seems like we find more out about the corruption in the state of Arkansas. I'm glad that the governor says that it's appropriate for DHS to terminate the Medicaid contracts with an obvious corrupt company. It's obvious to everyone, but it has been for a while. I'm also glad that the Attorney General is now looking, has now said, hey, look, this cold medicine guy, Ravindran, stole all this money and was integral in it. I'm glad that that's happening. But I do note that it is 2018, and we have these people who've been in office for 3 years, since 2015, almost 3. Well, 2.5 years. So come on, guys. Let's start moving the mechanisms and wheels of government a little faster. You think? Maybe? Let our yeses be yeses. I mean, come on. Look at the amount of money that was stolen. This whole scheme started, and here's the kicker. And this is just really more directed specifically at the governor. This is because of Medicaid expansion. You may not want to hear that, but this has all happened because of the state of Arkansas and Republicans with the Democrats agreeing that this $2 billion program, we must have it. And it made all of these PACs flush with cash because people were tithing the contracts back to the PACs, and it made all the politicians' campaign accounts flush with cash, and then they started laundering the money to enrich themselves because they knew how the system worked. If you don't think that this is because we gave the government too much money and we need to give them less of it to steal, then I don't know what would need to happen for you to change your worldview a little bit about the benefits of limited government and the pitfalls of big government. What would have to happen to convince you that your big government philosophy and way of doing things is actually hurting the taxpayers of this state? We don't deserve to be stolen from.
The news and talk of Northeast Arkansas. This is News Talk 101.3 FM and 1230 AM KBTM, Jonesboro, an EAB radio station.
4 appropriation bills. Well, we've still got 8 more that we're working on. And, last year the House did all 12 of them. The Senate did 0. So we're way ahead from where we were this time last year.
Can you describe, just for our listeners, the difference between, obviously he doesn't want to sign another omnibus, but
the way we've done this for so long, the way we did this for 8 years under the Obama administration, where you're essentially not doing these appropriations, or at least, the House may do them, but they're not going anywhere in the Senate. It's one is the appropriate way of governing. The other is the inappropriate way of governing and spending the taxpayer money, although it certainly seemed to work as far as a lot easier as far as President Obama's concerned. It was to his advantage to do that. Can you kind of tell us the difference there?
Yeah, and it's like everything at the federal government, it can be complicated, but I'll try to summarize it the best I can here on the radio. But you've got two major tranches of spending. You've got mandatory spending and discretionary spending. The mandatory spending has been set in place by previous Congresses, and you don't have to appropriate money for mandatory spending. So your programs like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, interest on the debt, and there's about 80 some odd social welfare programs that are on the mandatory side, and most that don't require appropriation bills. That makes up about 70% of all the money the government spends. So then you get over to the discretionary side, and there are 12 specific appropriation bills that are required to pass every year to fund all the discretionary spending. You've got in there the military, you've got transportation, you've got Veterans Affairs. All those bills have to be funded and money appropriated every year. In the House, we have a committee called the Appropriations Committee, and it's their job to write those bills. Constitutionally, those bills develop in the House, and then they're sent over to the Senate. So when you hear people talk about regular order, it means that this bill is drafted in the Appropriations Committee, it's debated there, passed out of the Appropriations Committee, then members are allowed to submit amendments. It's debated on the floor, and you come up with the final bill that you pass out of the House and send over to the Senate. So that's the open, transparent way to do budgeting in government. When those bills don't get taken up in the Senate and passed, we all know that the federal budget runs out on September 30th, and come October 1st, if those bills aren't passed, then you have a, quote, government shutdown, which the government really never shuts down, but it's that's what it's called.
Yeah, that's what they call it.
Yeah. Bill. Yeah. So,
and all that process is essentially was avoided in the last 8 years before President Trump, right?
Yeah, and it goes back further than that. The Bush administration didn't get many appropriation bills done either. And the fault lies in the Senate, because they have the 60-vote rule for cloture, and unless you've got a majority party with 60 votes, the other party will use that to not go to cloture and to bring up the bills. But it's been abused much more by the Democrats. And plus, if you get these huge omnibus bills, it gives the Senate a lot more power to go in and negotiate what's in those bills, and it kind of takes the House out of the question. So it's to the benefit of the Senate to do an omnibus bill, or to individual senators. And also, like the previous administration, that's where they would negotiate in a lot of the stuff that they wanted, especially when you had a Republican-controlled House. They would use the appropriations process to jam everything.
Yeah.
So instead of closing the government down, you would do what's called a continuing resolution that would just keep the government funded at the same levels it was funded from the previous year. And the continuing resolution sets another date for when the funding expires. So you keep creating these crisis situations, and it just continues to build lots of anxiety and fretting. And this past year, it was in March before we passed the budget for the spending to the remainder of the year through September. And it was an omnibus bill that bumped the deficit up to over $1 trillion, and had all kinds of stuff that wasn't spent.
I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the founding fathers.
They seem to be in full-scale retreat from spending cuts and are talking about raising people's taxes again. And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. Those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is on now.
It's time to roll your sleeves up, folks. We're going to get into some inside baseball this hour. And then at the bottom of the hour, we're going to be talking with Senator-elect Mark Johnson for a pre-Independence Day celebratory interview. Excited to have him back on the program. So, folks, listen, the headlines, if you missed the first hour, certainly go listen to it. We were talking about the corruption and everything else. But, you know, at some point you have to look at the managers of our government. I was trying to get into a little bit of that when we went to break. The people in positions of power. The government is terminating contracts with preferred family health care. Finally, they are, you know, with the Attorney General starting to look into all of this Medicaid fraud and everything else, which is really good. They arrested a guy, Ravindran, last Thursday, and it didn't make the press or the headlines, although there were some rumblings on Twitter about it right after I got off the program Friday morning, right after we wrapped things up. Anyway, good morning to you. The phone number 870-275-9799. You have found the intersection of conservative ideas and reality. This is Conduit News Radio. My name is Paul Harrell. And getting into the inside baseball, starting to talk about the laws on the books that aren't enforced. I remember when we would talk about financial laws, specifically, I just remember, you know, as a talk radio host that has covered a lot of different issues. I remember back during the Obama years when they were trying to pass their Dodd-Frank and they were trying to pass these banking regulations and they were lying to everybody saying that this is going to be great for Main Street, you know, on the heels of these bailouts and everything else. And a lot of people made the point, and I made the point, that if you actually look, and under Eric Holder, financial crimes with the Securities and Exchange Commission and all that, they were at an all-time low. The amount of laws that are on the books that are not being enforced to punish people, to prosecute people, to bring them to justice, that's supposed to protect us. Isn't it ironic that we make fun on this program these licensing boards and these agencies that try to regulate our economy to death under the guise of public safety, when in many cases these rules and regulations have far forgotten for a very long time about public safety, and instead it's about protectionism. It's about not allowing people to gain access to their profession. You know, you're cutting some of the rungs off of the ladder, that sort of thing. And it's not at all about public safety anymore. Isn't it ironic that that's the situation across the country today, not just in the state of Arkansas, but we have laws on the books that simply are not enforced? Or we don't have people who are looking at the laws on the books and saying, I know this law was written in the 70s, but does it apply today when it comes to, I don't know, attorneys getting contracts and passing bills for their clients? Or does it apply here? Or is it an ethics violation? There's one man in the state of Arkansas who's at least, and I'm so thankful that he is stepping up to the plate, and he's got a platform to do it over at conduitforaction.org. His name is David Ferguson, and he's stepping up to the plate and is asking these questions. And I'm just wondering, is there anyone in government that has power that's actually doing these things? I certainly hope so. David Ferguson posted last night an article. It's up at conduitforaction.org. You should check it out. We're going to get into some inside baseball here. The headline is The Forgotten Ethics Law. The Forgotten ethics law. The names of executives of Preferred Family Health Care who had also been former employees of the Department of Human Services keep popping up in criminal investigations of bribery and Medicaid fraud. The latest person who came up is Robin Ravindran, non-drowsy cold medicine, Robin Ravindran. I said this last hour, but I'm going to say it again. What is the allergy medication Ravindran? Well, it's when you have a cold and it knocks you out, but when you wake up, you discover that there's been a break-in and you've been robbed. Robin Ravindran, who was an executive vice president of Preferred Family Health Care, and prior to that was an administrator with the state Medicaid program. He was arrested for Medicaid fraud. The transition from employee of the regulatory body, DHS, to employee of a Medicaid provider that wants state contracts must be quite common. That in itself is a concern. But we must ask if any of these instances was a little noticed state ethics law broken. So in any of these instances, are they breaking the law, but it's not being enforced? Or is it being selectively enforced? Is it being selectively enforced? Perhaps Preferred Family Health Care somehow insulated them from being involved, or perhaps they weren't involved in the contracts when they were DHS employees. In any event, this is an issue that should be investigated. And Governor Asa Hutchinson's DHS and his other state agencies should be investigated to see whether the agencies have been following the ethics law. The law I'm referring to, David Ferguson writes, is Arkansas Code 19-11-701. The law doesn't have a name, but has been referred to in the past by the old compilation of Arkansas laws, Arkansas statutes annotated as Ethics in Contracting. So we're going to refer to this law henceforth, 1979, Ethics in Contracting. Much of this 1979 law is written with an eye on contracts for the purchase or sale of commodities, but it also applies to contracts involving services. Medicaid contracts are for services. The ethics in contracting law is quite detailed and addresses gratuities, kickbacks, disclosures of financial conflicts, restrictions on being involved when the employee has a conflict, and a temporary or permanent ban on being involved in certain matters after leaving state employment. The law also includes some good statements on ethical standards for state employees. David Ferguson writes, I want to highlight the provision imposing a permanent ban on a former state employee from being involved in certain matters. Again, this is section 19-11-709, part B, section 1. Be aware, he writes, there is also a similar provision applying a 1-year ban and a disqualification when a former employee is a partner. This is what the law says. Permanent disqualification of former employee personally involved in a particular matter. It shall be a breach of ethical standards for any employee knowingly to act as a principal or as an agent for anyone other than the state in connection with any judicial or other proceeding, application, request for a ruling or other determination, contract, claim or charge or controversy in which the employee participated personally and substantially through decision, approval, disapproval, recommendation, rendering of advice, investigation, or otherwise while an employee where the state is a party or has a direct and substantial interest. So what you have here with Ravindran is he's working for the government He's getting these fraudulent contracts to PFH. He leaves the government employment and then gets a job with Preferred Family Health Care. You don't think that's a little bit of a reward? Again, I'm not in David Ferguson. He says, I'm not insinuating any of the former employees of DHS have violated any provision of the ethics in public contracting law. I am raising this issue as one for consideration because the ethics in contracting law is rarely noticed. But look at what it says. You can't do this. Permanent disqualification for a contract or when the employee participated personally and substantially through decision, approval, or disapproval, or recommendation, or rendering of advice. I mean, those are pretty broad concepts. I think what David Ferguson is doing here, I think he's on to something, quite frankly. I think this ethics law should apply. But, again, is there anybody out there who's doing the work that David Ferguson is doing as a private citizen? Is there anybody in our government looking at these laws as a way to protect the taxpayers from this kind of theft? If you're not, there's always time to change direction. You can make different decisions, and you can start to do things differently. You can take the advice of David Ferguson. Here are David's recommendations. Number one, Governor Hutchinson should make sure his state agency directors and appointees are informed and are enforcing the law. You know, Conduit says that knowledge is power. That is so true. Number two, some state employees involved in purchasing receive training in ethics, but all state employees involved in contracts should receive training in compliance. Number three, former employees involved in contracts should be required to disclose that fact on contract and state contracts. Number four, the legislature should review the law to see if it should be updated to address loopholes. And number five, the legislature should consider moving enforcement of the law from Governor Hutchinson's director of the Department of Finance and Administration to the Arkansas Ethics Commission. David Ferguson says that the ethics and contracting law might also be an example of, if current ethics laws had been observed, amending the Senate Code of Ethics that we saw in the headlines the last couple of weeks might not have been necessary. I recall an opinion by the Department of Finance and Administration that applied part of commodities contracting rule to sales by legislators, since legislators receive a salary and could be considered state employees. I don't have a copy of the old ruling, but it is my recollection, he writes, it had to do with sales of fuel by Knox Nelson, who at the time was a state senator. Because the ethics in contracting law has gone largely unnoticed for nearly 40 years, I'm including the law in its entirety in the notes, including some sections added to the subchapter by other acts. The statute listed below will be primarily of interest to state employees involved in contracts, to those individuals researching ways to improve Arkansas's ethics laws, and perhaps to investigators. Now, here's the thing. If we're talking about contracts, and legislators can also be considered state employees, which they are. To argue otherwise is preposterous. It's all coming from the taxpayers. It's all coming from the same source. What does that say about attorneys? What does that do for attorneys entering into contracts with clients? That's my question. Honest question. Don't know the answer. We're going to take a break. You're listening to Conduit News Radio. I'm Paul Harrell. Give me a phone call, 870-275-9799.
In Arkansas, every single hour there is a politician not getting what they want. For some, it's an absolute nightmare. The sleepless nights wondering if progress will ever come. Lying awake pondering how to grow government in this political climate. Asking questions like, why don't my constituents want to pay a few cents more in taxes? Everyday politicians feel abused and neglected. These politicians are starving for power. They're hungry, confused, and they don't understand why no one seems to care. Will you be a patriot and commit today to help these poor, starved for power public officials? It's simple. All you have to do is commit to stay silent and never dissent or stand in the way of your politicians' rise to power. Never speak up or get engaged to stop the growth of government. By committing to these simple steps, you will ensure the life of your politician will be filled with contentment and the respect they are desperately seeking, as well as campaign contributions from lobbyists.
This message brought to you by Aristocrats Serving Arkansas.
PHP Parody.
The eagle's going to crack the shell of the egg that England laid.
Yes, sir, we can tell on this humid Monday morning in this congressional incubator.
And just as Tom here has written, though the shell may belong to Great Britain, the eagle inside belongs to us.
And just as Tom here has written, we say to hell with Great Britain, the eagle inside belongs to us.
We are 2 days away from the celebration of our Independence Day. Really excited about that. Now, isn't it true that the Declaration was actually approved today? Isn't the real day the 2nd? That the vote took place. I think that's the way it goes. The vote took place on the 2nd, but then there was like a swarm or something of insects. Isn't that the way it goes? Hang on a second. This just came to me because I'm sitting here. I didn't realize. I mean, I knew it were 2 days before, but then there's something that just clicked in my brain here that had to do with the 2nd. Yeah, it says here, just a really quick Google search, during the American Revolution, the legal separation of the 13 colonies from Great Britain in 1776 actually occurred on July 2nd, when the Second Continental Congress voted to approve a resolution of independence that had been proposed in June by Richard Henry Lee of Virginia, declaring the United States independent. Yeah, you have the here's another article. When is the real Independence Day? July 2nd or July 4th? I mean, we celebrated on the 4th, obviously. But there was something that happened. I think there was like some bugs or something. There's no doubt the Founding Fathers signed the Declaration of Independence in July 1776. But which date was the legitimate claim on Independence Day? July 2nd or July 4th? If John Adams were alive today, he would tell you July 2nd. Other founders would say July 4th, the day that is currently recognized as a federal holiday by our national government. And still, other founders would say, what Independence Day, since the holiday wasn't widely celebrated until many of the founders had passed away. Here's the evidence. You can decide for yourself. Officially, the Continental Congress declared its freedom from Great Britain on July 2nd, when it approved a resolution and delegates from New York were given permission to make it a unanimous vote. John Adams thought July 2nd would be marked as a national holiday for generations to come. Quote, the most memorable epic in the history of America. I am apt to believe that it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as the great anniversary festival. It ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade. with shoes, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations from one end of this continent to the other. From this time forward, forevermore, Adams said about what he envisioned a July 2nd national holiday would be. After voting on independence on July 2nd, the Continental Congress needed to draft a document explaining the move to the public. It had been proposed in draft form by the Committee of Five, and it took 2 days for the Congress to agree on the edits. Once the Congress approved the actual declaration on independence document on July 4th, it ordered that it be sent to a printer named John Dunlap. About 200 copies of the Dunlap broadside were printed, with John Hancock's name printed at the bottom. Today, 26 copies remain. That is why the Declaration has the words "in Congress, July 4th, 1776" at its top, because that is the day the approved last version was signed. Boy, imagine how fast they moved. They vote on the 2nd, and they get the thing printed and signed and edited by the 4th? That is an efficient government, right? That is an efficient government right there. My goodness. On July 8th, 1776, Colonel John Nixon of Philadelphia read a printed Declaration of Independence to the public for the first time on what is now called Independence Square. Now, here's the thing. This doesn't say anything about insects, so I don't know where I heard that. I'm pretty sure I've read it multiple places. But it seems to me that that may just be more myth, because if they had to actually print the document and edit it and everything else, between the 2nd and the 4th, that actually sounds a lot more plausible and realistic to me. The telephone number, 870-275-9799. Coming up at the next long segment, we're going to be talking with the Senator-elect, Mr. Mark Johnson, who defeated his opponents in the Republican primary. Mark is coming on. We're going to do a little interview about, really whatever's on his mind. Maybe he's got some great ideas, I know, on trying to solve some of this public corruption, trying to pass some of these laws. I know he's got some great ideas on that. And he also, I'm sure, has some great thoughts about Independence Day and what it means, what it means to be an American. Coming up on the program tomorrow, we're going to have Mr. Dan Wass on the program again. Haven't had him on in several months, but we'll talk about Second Amendment as it relates to the founding of our nation, because, I don't know. We don't spend as much time as we should on the founding of this country, and what better time to do it than 2 days before Independence Day? How many of you knew, by the way, that July 2nd was the actual vote? And boy, it was a contentious vote. When you think nobody knew how it was going to really go, and you had that New York delegation, that was an issue. I compare that to the Supreme Court vote that's coming up. Did anybody see Susan Collins of Maine saying that she's not going to vote for Donald Trump's nominee if he's not favorable to keeping abortion in this country alive? No pun intended, by the way. Keeping abortion alive. We got to take a break. Back in just a moment.
Tagged into the bill. That was that 2,300-page omnibus bill. And that's the one that the president signed, but he said it was the last one he was signing. Just the fact that 3 of the bills have been passed already, it wouldn't be a full-blown omnibus, but you could still have a large bill if we don't get more of these appropriation bills done on time.
Well, let's hope you guys do that. We're talking with Congressman Bruce Westerman. I think the normal budgeting process, the constitutional way, is the right way. Can we, just real quick, I want to get your thoughts on what happened last week. Nobody wanted to talk about that Inspector General's report with the FBI and everything else. Instead, the media shifted the narrative for an entire week and talked about the border and kids being separated from their parents and everything else. Then there was talk about housing some of these illegal aliens in Arkansas, and we've had people come out. There's been, politicians and stuff, people in power coming out against that. I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on that whole situation? And Bruce Westman, would you support housing, illegal immigrants here in the state of Arkansas?
Well, they proposed two options. One of them was to build a new center down around Kelso, and that may be the dumbest thing I've ever heard proposed. Go down by the site of a World War II internment camp and build a detention center. Just the optics of that aren't good. So, our federal delegation's been working on this, and that got squashed pretty quickly. So I think that one's off the table. With the Little Rock Air Force Base, I don't think we need to be building migrant holding centers on a military installation, especially one that's got does some of the sensitive stuff that Little Rock Air Force Base does. So I believe that one has been taken off the table as well.
Good.
A lot in part by the pretty much unanimous work from our federal delegation with agencies in the federal government. So there's been a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes to take those things off the table. And, it's still the federal government, and something could happen that we're not expecting. But my belief is that we're not going to see either one of those things happen in Arkansas.
Good.
Those holding centers need to be closer to the border. And there's already a lot of facilities out there. There were holding centers that were there during the Obama administration. A lot of the same stuff that was highlighted in the news last week had been going on for a long time, but they just decided to make a huge deal out of it last week.
I never meant to go into politics. It wasn't my intention when I was young. But I was raised to believe you had to pay your way for the blessings bestowed on you. I was happy with my career in the entertainment world, but I ultimately went into politics because I wanted to protect something precious. Ours was the first revolution in the history of mankind that truly reversed the course of government, and with three little words: we the people. We the people tell the government what to do. It doesn't tell us. We the people are the driver. The government is the car, and we decide where it should go and by what route and how fast. Almost all the world's constitutions are documents in which governments tell the people what their privileges are. Our Constitution is a document in which we, the people, tell the government what it is allowed to do. We, the people, are free.
All right, folks, welcome back. Happy Independence Day, I guess, right? July 2nd. This is when the vote actually took place. They didn't sign the thing till July 4th. Welcome to the program. We have Senator-elect from District 15 in the great state of Arkansas, Senator Mark Johnson. Senator-elect Mark Johnson. Hey, thanks for being on the program, Mark.
Thanks, Paul. It's always a pleasure to be with you on this. I guess we could just celebrate this whole week. We'll just call it Independence Week. How
Let's
about
do
that?
it. Independence Week. I like it. That's like, as my wife says, that the month of June is her birth month. So she wants to celebrate her birthday all month long. And
yes, we have a saying around and I won't make a big deal out of it. Someone will get back to her, but we refer to the week or two around my wife's birthday as Kathy Fest, so please don't spread that with anyone.
Kathy Fest. Okay. Something tells me that your wife and my wife would get along in their,
I'm sure they would.
Interpretations of birthday.
Oh, it's so interesting. You put that clip of President Reagan. His point is so valid in that, we drew up the Constitution and then soon after the Bill of Rights to more or less, and Patrick Henry gets a lot of credit for this, but others are involved too. But we passed the Constitution, we ratified it in the various states with the promise that there would be a Bill of Rights, because in the Declaration of Independence we talk about that the the just powers of government are those that they have from the consent of the governed. And that is so important for people to remember. And President Reagan's statement that you just played points out that this is the people telling the government what they can do, not the other way around. And that's what sets us apart from, up until that time in history, every other government, even wise governments, were some kind of benevolent dictator, king, or emperor, giving the people rights. In this case, we said, God gave you those rights. We're just going to create this mechanism to secure it. So I'm so thrilled that you played that clip from President Reagan. It really summed things up.
Yeah, and there is. I'm glad that you mentioned, that the rights come from the Creator. That is such a key difference, with America versus other governments, and it fundamentally established America under a form of humility. Because we're saying we don't have all the answers, and that's a very strange thing for any government to do. Because, like you said, there was always some. Well, first of all, America stands in complete contrast to King George, and they were like, this is strange because we're preaching the gospel. You had George Whitefield and the Great Awakening, and you had all these things happening, and they were saying that, look, everybody's going to be judged by God, and your righteousness your only chance is for your righteousness to be found in Christ. And so, if that's what they were preaching, Mark, the colonists start to think, well, then what is this concept of a royal bloodline, and why does King George why is he special? If we're all going to be judged by God, why is this one guy special? And that, I feel like, planted the seed that eventually allowed us to throw off the yoke.
Oh, absolutely. And Americans at that time many of them looked at themselves as free Englishmen. And as Parliament and the King began to treat them like they were something less than that, second-class citizens or subjects, if you will, that was the real beginning of it. Because George Washington and Thomas Jefferson considered themselves equal to all of their former kinsmen, on the other side of the moat, and that was sort of the thing. Wait a minute, I'm just as good as the Duke of whatever, and that was the beginning of that. Is seeing each other as equal. But I really want to thank you for having me on. It's never like you think it's going to be. It doesn't matter. I've been around. A lot of people that know me know I've been around this stuff all my whole life, but being a senator-elect is very different than just thinking about it, or even, 50, 60 years around the institution. You're now kind of having to actually make those decisions. And Paul, one of the things I promised in my campaign is I would work on ethics, and I've been working on it. I'm actually working on a draft of a bill. I've talked to some other legislators about it, specifically some House members as well, and I'm working on this thing, and I don't want to take anything away from the work that the new Senate Ethics Committee is doing, because they're kind of doing an inside thing. It's an inside baseball. These are senators policing themselves, but what I'm working on will be a statute that will prescribe some behaviors and set some criminal penalties for those that violate the public trust. And we do need to have the Senate have rules that and procedures that people have to disclose their conflicts of interest. And I would take it maybe a step further than the rule that was recently passed that more or less says you have to shine the light on yourself. I would say that we need to take it a step further, and that in certain cases, and then this is where it gets difficult, which cases, but that a senator would have to recuse from participating in certain legislation, including voting on certain legislation. And whatever I come up with, and my other colleagues that are working with, whatever we come up with, it'll have to meet that test. It'll have to say, ultimately a situation can exist where you just won't be able to vote. You'll just have to stay out of the mix on this. Now, I did attend the meeting, the organizational meeting last week of the Ethics Committee, and I'm pleased with the the discussion that the members had, and I want to say that I hope the public will understand that some legitimate questions were raised. For example, and it was in the record, I think he would mind me saying so, Senator Larry Teague of Nashville said that, he is in the insurance business, and, anything that comes up related at all to insurance, would he need to go through this process? Would he need to, send a letter to the clerk that says, I'm in the insurance business, so please everyone know that? Or could I send one letter at the beginning of the session and say, I'm in the insurance business? And I think that and again, this is what makes legislation. It's great to say, we need to fix that. It's the nitty-gritty details of defining that make it more difficult. I don't think anyone's saying that Senator Teague can't have an opinion and participate in debate on a general subject of which he has great knowledge. That's the advantages we have of a citizen legislature. On the other hand, if it were an issue specifically related to a specific instance in his practice, then there would be a need for him to, or any senator, to possibly recuse. And therein hangs the issue. How do we define that properly where we can take advantage of someone's expertise in a certain area, insurance, the law, plumbing, carpentry, whatever, that the state may have a need to regulate, but on the other hand, not allow the kind of abuse that we've seen in the last, in the last year, even the last few months, we've seen these things come out about a certain firm in Missouri and a senator that has received a huge amount of money. There's just some, now it's a great step, Paul, to have sunshine, to flip over the rock and shine the light on it. But, the legislation I'm working on will require, it'll require all legislators and even all public officials, including the staffs of the constitutional officers, to go that step further.
I love that you're talking about criminal penalties, because you have to have a deterrent. You have to incentivize people to not do this stuff. You will go to jail if you're caught, acting improperly. Now, we're talking with Senator Mark Johnson, or Senator-elect Mark Johnson. So this is what I want to know, Mark. Any time, it seems like, with Senator King's ethics bill that he tried to run, and I understand he's going to try to run his Medicaid disclosure bill in Legislative Council the next time they meet. Again, for the probably the fifth time now. But the attorneys, it just seems it's the attorneys. They are always the ones that are saying, this is going to make it difficult for me to be an attorney. And so, how do you address that? How do we address? Because to me, that's really the elephant in the room, is that we have attorneys that have a very, very broad scope and really a loophole to be able to pass bills for their clients.
I think you summed it up, Paul. And again, ultimately, any attorney, or for that matter, anyone in any profession, has to make a decision whether or not their work that they've chosen, their profession, is compatible with their service as a legislator. And it doesn't mean that attorneys can't be legislators. I can't imagine us getting through the process without having attorneys in the mix. They're very important to the process. But when you have an attorney who is on retainer to someone that's involved with, let's just pull back the curtain and talk about the real thing, the Medicaid, preferred family health care, has paid you six figures, then your objectivity and ability to be fair in any kind of legislation related to that is not just called into question, it's just improper conflict of interest. Now, those are the easy ones. It won't be hard to define something like that. It's when it gets into something a little more settled that, we're going to have to craft legislation. And as you know, you've been up at the Marble Palace, as you call it, Paul, and you've seen that the biggest problem with legislation is you write something, everybody says, yeah, that'll fix it. and then someone comes out of left field and said, look, I know you didn't mean to affect me, but you just put me out of business. Well, it's the law of unintended consequences that makes it difficult legislation. And someone will come up with something that'll say, gee, you know, you didn't mean to hurt me, I know, but hey, I need to have this changed. And that's why it takes a little while to put these together. And having just spent a couple of weeks working on something like that, I can relate. I understand that. But it's those egregious examples that we've seen in the paper. Those are the easy ones. It's the little more subtle things that we do that to maintain our citizen legislature. It's going to take a little more work. But I think ultimately, to answer your question, people are going to have to decide: do you want to be a legislator or do you want to stay in business? Sometimes they're incompatible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's that's actually a really good point, Mark. Sometimes they are incompatible. So are we willing to how many legislators down there now, or people, you know, who are involved in the process, are willing to accept that as a potential outcome? Because if we are willing to accept that as a potential outcome, meaning there's some legislators, you know, who are attorneys that it's just not going to be incompatible for you anymore, or you're going to have to alter the type of clients that you take. I feel like that's perfectly reasonable. You know, if it means that we as a people have more confidence in our government, that they're not enriching themselves, you know, through this illicit manner or having this conflict of interest. But I'm kind of also skeptical at the same time. You know, if that outcome where it's possible that it's just not compatible, if they reject that as being a possible outcome from these laws, I don't know if the problem, you know, is going to be properly addressed. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's no magic bullet for this thing. I wish there were, but we do bump into the problem of again, this citizen legislature thing. I mean, you're not going to get successful people, then that's smart people, the people that we want to serve, to quit everything else they're doing and take a $40,000 a year job and do this full time. Now, the people could decide, look, you can't have any outside income. This is the only job you can have, and we're going to pay you, picking up $150,000 a year, about what Congress makes, and that's it. You can't get any other income. Well, if we want to do that, that's fine. We've done away with that citizen legislator. We don't have a Senator Gary Stubblefield who is on the farm during the day, and we don't have a Senator Larry Teague who's in the insurance business and understands the day-to-day problems of that. You know, we don't have that. Now that's bad. I think we need that input, but we've got to reconcile those problems. And one thing I want to point out about the things we've seen, the scandals we've seen lately, and I'll mention Senator Files and even Senator A. We want to do that. These people didn't come to the legislature with these clients, this type of business, and those problems. These are people, and I knowing these people, and I'll add Senator Woods to the mix, these are people that came to the legislature with good intentions, and for most part early in their career were good, conscientious, conservative legislators. And somewhere along the way, they were tempted and succumbed. And I say that. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't people that are elected to the legislature that first day they sit there, they're crook.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Mike O'Neill, it didn't take Mike O'Neill very long, and he was compromised pretty much immediately.
Well, I tell people, and some people will shock when I say this, I say, you know, Nick Wilson came to the Senate as a reformer, and a little bit too liberal reformer in my view, but that's not, you know, never had a crossword with Senator Wilson. But Nick was part of the reform group that were trying to take down some of the old ways of doing things, where a senator was not just openly on a particular side. He was actually the lobbyist, paid lobbyist for a particular interest group. Mm-hmm. And it was perfectly legal at the time. And we look back at things like that almost in shock, but it was just accepted at that time. So, and in fairness, you know, Nick came to one of his movements were to try to break that up. Well, he succumbed to sort of to the dark side, and people are tempted, and there's, you add the kind of money that's flowing through the Medicaid program to the mix, and you've got unscrupulous people like Mr. Cranford, and you get the result that we've seen, and it's not a good thing, and it causes the people to need to be much more conscientious.
I agree with you, and I think what we have to do, and this is what I hope, getting your message out, Mark, and what you're working on, somehow we have to penetrate that Marble Palace bubble and get people to realize the severity of what has taken place and how bad it really is. I mean, some of this has been reactionary because the mainstream media is finally getting involved here and asking tough questions, and good. But when you go down the list like you just did, Files, Woods, Rusty Cranford, everything else, we've got. I just don't want the exception to make the rules, because if we're coming down on them, we're putting these new laws in place. The exception doesn't need to make the rule necessarily, and I think if we approach it from that mentality, I think it's going to be very effective. At least I hope it is. I got good hopes for it. I'll give you the last word, sir.
Well, one thing I don't want us to do, Paul, and you're absolutely right in what you just said, but I don't want us to reach a point where, whether it's having to, as was brought out by Senator Rayford, put your elderly mother-in-law's home address on your disclosure form, and things that just reach out beyond just really disclosure, and that's something that's got to be resolved. Things like this that would discourage good people from running for office because they're just not willing to completely open their lives up to scrutiny. There's got to be some middle ground, and the question is, where do we set that bar that protects the integrity of the process but doesn't run off good people? And let's be honest, as one of my soon-to-be colleagues said to me last week, he said, this is a great set of rules we're writing for honest people. And the crooks are going to always have their pie boxes stuffed with cash.
Yeah, that's true. Immoral people will always find a way to break the law. That is a truth we do need to recognize in all this as well. Okay, Senator Mark Johnson, I thank you so much for coming on for this pre-Independence Day, or actually it is Independence Day celebration, and we wish you the best, sir. You have a great holiday.
Thanks, Paul. You and yours, too.
All righty.
Bye-bye.
Folks, if you're just joining us, July 2nd was the actual day they voted for independence, and then they crafted the document, edited it, and signed it on July 4th. We're going to take a break. Back in just a moment.
Buy, sell, and trade at Triple R Pawn in Ash Flat. Firearms, computers, sporting goods, musical instruments, tools, jewelry, and everything else you can think of. It's all at Triple R Pawn at the Light in Ash Flat. Gun enthusiasts, log on now to triplrpawn.com and browse their amazing inventory. That's triplrpawn.com. You can also call them at 870-994-PAWN. That's 870-994-7296. Let the great team at Triple R Pawn help you find what you're looking for. That's Triple R Pawn at the Light in Ash Flat, triplrpawn.com, or call 870-994-PAWN.
Russellville-based firearms manufacturer Omega are making clones of the most notable German firearms in the world. These delayed rotor lock firearms have been and are currently used by law enforcement and military worldwide. At Omega, they manufacture their guns right here in Arkansas and produce the best reproduction in the marketplace that comes with a complete 5-year warranty. At Omega, they take firearm manufacturing seriously and offer discounts to active and retired law enforcement. Whether you're using Omega firearms to defend the public, defend your family, or for target practice, Omega has your back. For pricing, go to omega-guns.com. That's omega-guns.com. If you're like me, you believe that small business is the heart of Arkansas's economic engine, and it should be viewed that way by the politicians in Little Rock. Conduit for Commerce also believes, like you and I believe, policies that achieve less regulation and lower taxation help small business in Arkansas thrive. Other policies like small, constitutionally consistent government and reducing citizen dependency on government keeps it from growing and expanding its influence on our daily lives. Conduit for Commerce works every day to educate the general public and legislators on these important priorities in the name of Arkansas small business. By the way, contributions to Conduit for Commerce are tax deductible. Log on now to conduitforcommerce.org and click on Contact Us on the right side of the page. That's conduitforcommerce.org. Go there now and learn the facts on protecting small business in Arkansas.
The Declaration will be a triumph. I tell you, a triumph. If I was ever sure of anything, I'm sure of that. A triumph. And if it isn't, we've still got 4 days left to think of something else.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to give away a Liberty Machine T-shirt to the next caller. We want the first caller. It is, of course, Independence Day celebration today on Conduit News Radio. So if you want a Liberty Machine T-shirt right now at the end of the program, we are standing by. 870-275-9799. That's 870-275-9799. One more time. 870-275-9799. You got to keep that. And it's gone. And the Liberty Machine T-shirt is gone. We appreciate you guys listening to the program. And we'll be back. We'll give some more away tomorrow. It'll be the Tuesday before the 4th. Man, of course, we want to let people, we want to, I don't know. Want to share the wealth a little bit, not in a socialistic, redistributive way, in a charitable way. The way we're supposed to be. So, we appreciate all of you out there listening, and we're glad to be able to give away the T-shirt. This program, so you can get this show. Go listen to the first hour. We talked a lot about. I'm told I'm pronouncing Ravindran's name wrong. Hang on a second. Let me give you the actual name. Sounds like a cold medicine. Ravindran. I've been saying Ravindran. It's Ravindran. Ravindran does sound more like a cold medicine instead of Ravindran. Non-drowsy Ravindran. You take it, it knocks you out, and you wake up, and there's been a break-in, and you've been robbed. That's seems to be the situation with a lot of them. The problem is that Hutchinson doesn't really sound like a cold medicine, so the analogy kind of falls to pieces at that point. Gesundheit, I guess. You say it, yeah. Anyway, we're talking, of course, about Senator A. Jeremy Hutchinson. We've got to go. We'll be back tomorrow, 6 a.m. Back in just a moment. Or we'll see you tomorrow.
The news